Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out Volume 2. Oh, this is beautiful. Look at this. Oh, the Z-Wave Carol alone. The Golden Stallion here with you, of course, for your Sovereign Tech Patreon only Wednesday Q&A. And I was just before recording here reading through my new copy. No Starch Press is not a Sovereign Tech sponsor. Of course, I would gladly have them as one, but they are not. And so last year, in October of 2017, the first edition, which looked very much like a Bible. I mean, very much. Had the black leather cover or imitation leather, for the vegans out there, which is fine. And the gold gilded pages and everything of the very popular cryptography or really general hacking journal called POC GTFO, Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out. It's a wonderful, wonderful journal. You can find it on, you don't have to buy these books, these volume collections. You can just read it right online totally for free. But it's beautiful because it's all cryptography stuff. It's a lot of it's kind of what you would find in 2600, the Hacker Quarterly, where in this one, hell, there's even... I was shocked, in fact, where the bookmark was set in it, because this edition also kind of looks like a Bible. It has a green leatherette, has the gold lettering, but it doesn't have the gold gilded pages, but it does have a great electrical schematic on the side of it that I think is actually for a vector display. But there's actually an article in here from the 11th issue of Proof of Concept or Get the Fuck Out about the original vector graphics Star Wars game from back in the day, which it's discussing just how really difficult it is, while you can play it in MAME just fine, to actually emulate the vector display itself. That's a real pain in the ass, and they kind of break down how you can do it in an updated way. Really wild stuff. And I was serious, the Z-Wave Carol, which is all about how using a stolen crypto key, a couple of cats were able to break into some Z-Wave networks, which I thought was really damned impressive. Anyway, I love these. Where was I going with that? Yeah, you can read them online for free, and it has all kinds of fun stuff in it, but definitely a very high technical level. But the beauty is that it's written as if it were, I don't know, something from like some Baptists from the 18th or 19th century. It's written in very biblical language, which is why it makes sense that when No Starch Press releases hard copy of the issues of the various issues that get released, because that's how they put it out on the website. Is, I don't know, it's not quarterly, but every once in a while they'll have a few issues come out, and they'll be put together in that way as issues. But anyway, No Starch Press puts out the physical editions, which I absolutely love. In fact, they're really the only books I get. The nice thing is No Starch Press gives you ebook copies of whatever you buy on there anyway. But the only books I really keep as paper copies, ironically, are texts on cryptography. In fact, there's I could count on my hand how many actual paper books I own. And other than the McPherson's Ultimate Guide to Wilderness Living, which of course it makes all the sense in the world why I would keep a paper copy of that, because fuck, if you got to live like that, you're probably not going to have electricity. So, don't count on your Kindle Paperwhite or my Kindle Oasis, to last the month that they claim for it. So, you keep a paper copy of that sort of thing. But the other thing is all of my all my books on cryptography. I think I've mentioned this before. A lot of people don't realize this, but I read all kinds of things, right? Fiction, nonfiction. I just read the wackiest shit, and I know when you people love that I talk about it. But some of my leisurely reading, and of course it's not exactly for leisure, it's part to, keep up with my industry. I'm reading cryptographic papers all the time, like all the time. And sometimes it's a slog, sometimes it's a little more enjoyable. And I love POC GTFO because it makes it fun to read, that sort of stuff. It really does. And to read these exploits with that kind of, hello neighbors and everything, brothers and sisters, and it's so much fun. But yeah, volume 2 just came out, and it finally landed on my doorstep. I got volume 1. I was kind of a backer for volume 1. Not that it necessarily needed backing, but it just such a great resource. If, for some of the way more technically minded listeners of Sovereign Tech, I know I reach a pretty broad range. There's people who aren't so technically minded. I've had people tell me they listen to the show just because afterwards they feel smarter. But a lot of times they're not exactly sure what the hell I'm talking about. So I try to keep it, at a more of a layman's level. But, maybe at some point, because I do other podcasts. Of course, I started Game Talk, which is now its own podcast, actually video podcast. And then I also started the User Podcast, which is a much shorter format where it's a around 15 minute show, at least once per month, and the episode 2 coming out very soon. But it might be interesting to experiment with doing something a little more maybe a lot more technical, and really breaking down on it. Because, I'll tell you, when I was reading through this book, there's a lot of electrical schematics in it. And man, I remember my dad. So you have to understand, my dad, while a Christian, or would become a Christian, of course, who originally, were Jews, but but my parents converted to Christianity just about when I became a teenager. My dad, though religious, I guess I'll say, is just one of the most brilliant guys. We're literally talking about a guy that worked on the Voyager program. He just a fucking genius. And, I think pretty highly of myself. I won't deny, but I am not at that level. And I just remember, on 3x, so my dad would have, he always wore, I don't know how many times, I could probably, speaking of counting on my hand, I could probably count the times on my hand where I saw my dad wear a t-shirt. He was either wearing a tank top because he was a marathon runner, and a damn good one, and actually barefoot marathon runner at that. But he was a marathon runner. He doesn't do it anymore, so that's why I can say was. And anytime he wasn't that, he was doing the business and whatever. And he'd either wear a tank top for the runs, or he'd be wearing always, some kind of long sleeve, button up shirt or whatever. That's the best you'd see him in. And it's sometimes a short sleeve one, but he'd always have, a dress shirt on that would have a pocket at the breast. And he would keep, he would do, it was the full Revenge of the Nerds thing, right? He had the pocket protector, but he'd have a bunch of 3x5 cards, always at the ready to write stuff in his shirt pocket. And so sometimes when we would say be at the skating rink or something, which also my dad was a hell of a roller skater. It's the one thing I feel confident I can say that I'm better at him, or better than him at. There's a few things I can say that I'm better at than him, but that is one where, I have medals. Not to say if my dad, did it when he was really young, I'm sure he could have won medals too. He was really, really, he's just a really smooth guy, And anyway, we'd be at the skating rink, for those that don't know, I don't talk about this too often. But I'm literally like a trophy winning roller skater on quads. I know people don't expect that from me because here I am, the 6'1" guy, kind of burly and whatever. But I am. So, and I can still do it very, very well, beyond well. So, and, not boasting, just look, folks, if you can back it up, it's not boasting. Okay. Anyway, so my dad would have these, he'd have these 3x5 cards, and sometimes he'd just go, sit down, and he would start drawing on the, he'd have his pens and everything. Like I said, he'd have full pocket protector, and he'd start drawing on these 3x5 cards, and he'd be drawing electrical schematics for whatever the fuck he was coming up with. Now, usually, I was very young, and so I didn't exactly understand everything, that he was talking about. But, I learned pretty early on because, I wanted to know, wow, what are all these cool shapes that my dad's drawing, and voltage regulators and all this stuff. It was just really, it was really wild. And he would explain it to me, and I'd, try and pick it up and everything. And I can still, read electrical schematics, no problem. But it's, the education you don't get in school, right? When would, especially someone that young, why would they show you electrical? They're what make the world go round and round, but why the fuck would anybody show you electrical schematics, at that age? I'm so, my dad is far from a perfect guy. I'm not even going to necessarily say he's a good guy, but I am going to say that I am so happy for what he taught me as a young man, or, what I learned just from being around him. As not even a young man, as a boy, as a child. It was really something. And it just seeing the electrical schematics and kind of going over them, it made me think of that today. And, it was they're fond memories, of getting to understand that, because you almost feel like you're understanding the nature of the universe. And while it's not the nature of the universe per se, it's certainly the nature of society in a very real sense. And that kind of thing is just so precious. And I, I'll give him this. He never treated me like an idiot. In fact, quite the opposite. He always like would tell me when I did something that's ingenious, or when I'd say something that he thought was brilliant and all that. We don't do that enough for people. We don't tell young ones. I get, look, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later on in the episode. I get it. Okay. I get, where people are like, oh, we're just teaching all our kids that they're special snowflakes. No, you know what? These kids are special, and you need to tell them that they are special, and that they are important, and that they are not just cogs in the machine, and that, you got to give your kids, you got to tell them the reality, and you got to tell them the reality, and you've got to let them, and when they do something like fucking incredible, you got to tell them they did something fucking incredible. And don't treat them like an idiot. Don't treat them like they're just some child and they don't know. Children can come up with the most amazing things. I don't think we tell kids enough. And I will give not to get too much into my history here. We have great questions to get into. We'll get into them, folks. But I just want to say, I would give my parents the credit of two things. One, I'll give my dad the credit of never treating me like a fool, always talking to me like an adult, and like I could understand what he was doing. And just the fact that because he would talk to me like I could understand what he was writing down as far as electrical schematics. Obviously, at first I couldn't, but it didn't take long. And the reason it didn't take long is because he believed, or he gave, if anything, just in him talking to me like a normal human fucking being and not like a child, okay, or not in an infantile way. I say like a child, like I'm insulting them. See, that's how ingrained this shit is in our society. But instead of talking to me in an infantile way, he talked to me like I was a normal human being, and that gave me the permission to just that, like that gave me the permission inside to where, no, I can learn about this. I can understand this. And that was the gateway. That showed me the door that I could walk through to where I could understand all this stuff. And I'm very thankful for that. We got Thanksgiving coming up. I don't give a fuck about Thanksgiving, but if I'm going to give some thanks, well, there we go. There's some thanks for that. And then when my parents got divorced, and eventually when I turned 16, I'll give thanks to my mother, who was, raising me and my 4 siblings alone. I will give her credit for when I turned 16, she let me alone. I was just having actually a chat. These are private chats, and I'm not going to discuss like what the other person said or whatever, but I can certainly say what I brought up. But I was having a chat with a patron, of course, who was in the Master of the Triple Blacks Art Rewards, or Master of the Triple Black Arts reward tier, which is the $100 tier, which allows you to get a 1 hour where I can talk with you, consult, whatever the fuck you want for 1 hour. You got me. And I brought up, talking to him, just for myself. And I was mentioning that, like I've always looked older. Like when I was 16, I got into strip clubs. Now, the beautiful thing is, now I'm not saying it's good for 16-year-olds to go to strip clubs. But, my mother, fortunately, became very hands-off with me at a very young age. At 16, she pretty much let me do whatever I wanted. As long as I came home, went to school, whatever, she didn't care what was really going on. So yeah, at 16, I was going to casinos. I was going to, I never got into drugs, never got into drinking, never got into any of that. Not really. I drank a little bit when I was in the military years later, but I never got into any of that stuff. And I'm not saying there's necessarily anything wrong if you did, but regardless, I would go to these things, and like I really got to experience the world at a very early age. As soon as I turned 17 and it was legal for me to fly with effectively parents' permission and all that, fly alone. I started doing that, and she was very hands off, as long as I got home, as long as, school was going good and whatever. She just let it be. And I'm very thankful for that, because I think that allowed me to both counts. What my father did as when I was younger and what my mother did later on, allowed me to become an adult perhaps faster. That's not to say that I turned out right. I mean, for fuck's sake, I joined the military, and I'll never forgive myself for that. But regardless, it did give me some very precious lessons in life. Having that, first off, getting treated like an adult as a child, and second off, of having the freedom when I was growing up to explore the world. Both of those were just, money can't buy that. I mean, it really cannot. So anyway, there you go. Something I'm thankful for this Thanksgiving. Those are the two things that I am very, very thankful for that allowed me to be, even though I had some bumps in the road, and I did, but it allowed me and gave me the foundation of the person that I get to be today, and that I've become. Of course, like any person, I think that's your, well, I don't you always want a second opinion. I don't want to say I'm healthy because I could get a second opinion on that and somebody might think quite the opposite. But I think any healthy person continually grows and evolves and is always learning, so I'm always doing that. And by no means saying that I'm perfect or anything remotely close. But I am glad for the foundation that I was given because I think that gave me the tools, the very early tools to, at least be able to adapt. We don't all have to be geniuses. We don't all have to be brilliant, smart, beautiful, or strong, or whatever. But we do, I think it is important to have the ability to adapt. And those two things that my parents, those two opportunities, shall we say, that they provided for me, which cost them nothing, really gave me the ability to adapt in a very real way. And that's so key. That's so key, to adapt and figure things out, I'm reminded of Neil deGrasse Tyson, and I know some people have problems with him because he's a political shill. Well, he is, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have some good things to say here and there. I remember him saying that, he doesn't want to work with the most brilliant people. He doesn't want to work with, the person that went to Harvard and did this, blah, blah, blah. He wants to work with the Isaac Newtons. Now you'd say, well, fuck, Isaac Newton was brilliant. He would argue, no, he wasn't. That Isaac Newton wasn't brilliant. He didn't have a lot of knowledge in his head. Just that he was able to figure shit out. That's why he was brilliant. And that's why he came to all of the amazing conclusions that he did. Not because, he had an amazing storehouse of knowledge in his head, but because he had the ability to figure shit out. And I would argue that also comes from the ability to adapt to one's surroundings, life situations, and so on. So, being able to adapt and just figure things out from the baseline, very important tools to give any person, child or adult. So anyway, little sidetrack there. We've got tons of questions to get into, and I need to start getting into them. So, all right, we've got a tech question here, and then we've got a philosophical one, and of course we'll have your album of the week. And oh, fucking A, is this album of the week gonna be dynamite? It is awesome. Can't wait to talk about it. I mean, it is everything. It is hot. It is epic. It is the whole business. And someone who I am a huge fan of. She is amazing. Anyway, okay, so let's get to our first question here. A little bit of a tech question. Hi, Brian. I have an older Moto G, which I like, but it's only got 6 gigabytes of storage, and I'm constantly running out of space and having to delete app data just to update those apps. I'm guessing maybe you have 8 gig of storage or something like that. But anyway, regardless, you're low on storage. That's what matters here. And I don't have many apps. I have a 15 gigabyte SD card, probably 16, right, in the phone, but it doesn't automatically move stuff onto the SD card. Once a week or so, I have to go to each app and clear the data or click the Move to SD card button. How the heck can I get the phone to automatically put data on the SD card? Is there an app for that? Okay, there is. This is kind of a complex thing. There is an app for that. Now, I'm not sure exactly which Moto G you're using, or more importantly, what version of Android you're using, because there's a few different ways to go about this. And I'll lay them out for you. Okay, and there's links in the show notes for this Q&A where you can find stuff about it. So. I did put in what was it? How to Make Use Of has a great article that's all about this. Now, if you can root your phone, and fortunately, Moto G is a popular model. Okay, so instructions on how to root things, even though can be a roll of the dice. You might brick your phone, even though the bricking of phones is something that's kind of falling away. Like things are getting. at least with newer phones, things are getting to the point where, you can do this stuff with a little more confidence, but, it's always a possibility. There's apps to SD, APPS number 2 SD, apps to SD, okay? There's that, and then there's folder mount. Those are two apps that will pretty much force everything, even like third-party apps, like it just forces every fucking thing to go to your SD card, and it pretty much stays there. As what I've seen from it. Now, I haven't used this stuff in a while. I haven't rooted a phone, honestly, in a while, because I haven't really had the need to do it. So, but you do have to root a phone to be able to use those apps, and that's really the only way it works, because you really have to force the situation in Android. Now, another possibility here. Okay, now, and again, Moto G, actually one of the easier phones to root. Like, there's plenty of instruction manuals on how to do it, regardless of which model you happen to have. Even if you have like the Generation 1, you should be okay. I like the I actually used to really like the Moto G series, particularly because they were so popular. So you could get Lineage OS, or at the time CyanogenMod, on them easy enough, and they were waterproof. They're no longer like the G6, the Moto G series now, pretty much after the G4, is kind of stunk. I like the Moto, because here's the thing, right? Like, the big seller for me with the Moto G was that it was a $200 phone that was waterproof. That was, outside of like Kyocera, that was a very rare proposition 2-3 years ago. Now, since they're not waterproof anymore, personally, I think the Moto E series, which is, they are sub $200 phones, is just totally the way to go. Like the Moto G becomes kind of pointless, or the newer Moto Gs. The older ones are great. The newer ones are pointless if they don't have that waterproofing. That was like the whole excitement for me around the Moto G. And they had like the customizable colors for the case and everything. That was nice too. But yeah, ever since they stopped doing the waterproofing, which is also not a popular feature in a lot of phones anymore for some reason. I don't know if it's because now that Apple does it, the Android, manufacturers or software, handset makers just don't think that it's a differentiator anymore, so they don't bother. But for whatever reason, it's disappointing that that's not so much a thing anymore. I think there's services where you can like send a phone to get waterproofed and so on, but well, anyway. So yeah, so there's those two apps that can do it, but again, you'd have to root your phone. I put a link in the show notes so that you can, find that info, and it actually gives you info on like the different capabilities of different versions of Android, because other people might find this useful, of how to do that transfer. So I put that in there. It was a really, really well done article actually from this year on how to go about that. So there's that option. The other option is that if you are using, I think it's from Android 6 and up, okay, if you're using that, you can use the micro SD card as combined storage with the onboard storage of the smartphone, of an Android smartphone. Okay. There's a problem with this though, but I do have somewhat of a solution for you. Okay. The problem is that SD cards are traditionally very slow. Okay. As far as read-write speeds and all that. And so your phone, especially if it's an older Moto G, it's probably, by comparison to today's phone, if it works for you, it works for you, so who cares? Like I don't mind slower phones most of the time. There's some times where like you're kind of getting promised that, oh no, this is, optimized and should be faster. And then when it's actually slow, okay, then I complain. But like, I wouldn't mind if the phone's a little slower to some degree. Anyway, so that's a problem, is that it could slow down your phone significantly if you did the combined storage, and there's a feature to set that up that's also in the instructions in the link that I put in the show notes. But now, okay, so doing that with micro SD cards has really been a roll of the dice. It's the feature's been there for years, but it's kind of impractical. Like, it doesn't work very well. Okay, it's not very fast, and so what's the point? I, in general, don't set it up, like right now. So my daily driver right now is a Nokia 6.1. It's a newer one. It has 3 gig of RAM, and it has 32 gig of onboard storage. Now, before that, I was using a phone that I've had for, a year or two, which was my Moto E4. So kind of a similar situation to you, where it had 16 gig of onboard storage. And then I could put 128 gigabyte, micro SD card in it. Now, if I did the combined storage where it it treated the 16 gigs of onboard storage and the 128 gigs of onboard storage as one hard drive, effectively. Okay. It would just run way too slow. It was completely impractical. And the only reason I stopped using my Moto E4 is because apps now, like your average Android app, or just what you need, like your bank app, what automatically comes on Android, and a few other things like Signal, especially because of Signal backups, because Signal backups can take up a lot of storage. I would have to do exactly what you're doing. I'd have to keep doing it, even with 16 gig of onboard storage. So we're at the point today where you need 32 gigs of onboard storage to really be able to install apps and not worry about it too much. Because it's incredible. You wouldn't think it, but you can install 100 apps on a phone, and I don't think that that's a lot of apps. and you're just doing what most people would just do with a phone. Like, that's not even extreme anymore, I think. I try to keep my shit really, really slim, and I do keep it well under 100 now, but that took a while of making things efficient and making all of that work, to really make that possible. So we're really at a point where, in my opinion, and this was also highlighted with my recent review of not the Nokia 6.1, but the Nokia 2, which was an Android Go phone where it only had 8 gig of onboard storage and so on. It just became way too apparent. Even just putting Signal on there would kill it, with all of the, just the apps that normally came with it. It would just be too much. You couldn't put Instagram. You couldn't put any of that on there. And that really highlighted the fact that, it doesn't have to be this way, because I think those apps are just filled with bloat. All right. But we're to the point where you need, because of what Silicon Valley forces on us, not because of what's actually practical and necessary, but because of what they force on us, we really need 32 gigs of storage, at least on a smartphone. Okay. Now, there is what might be easier for you to do. Okay. Is there's an app. I'm a huge fan of this app. There's an app called SD-Made, and you're going to want to get the Pro version. I don't know. It's like $4 or $5 to pay for the Pro version in the Google Play Store. And this will clear out and optimize. It'll clear out your cache, optimize everything, and you run that like once a week, and that will probably help you out quite a bit. And you'll see you'll be clearing out like a gig a shot once a week, and you'll continue to have room. And anytime you go to update apps, and the Play Store says, hey, you can't update this, blah blah blah, run SD-Made. It'll clear out stuff to where you probably be able to. So that way you don't have to go app per app and constantly configure those settings or constantly clear the cache in the app. SD-Made will do it for you automatically, and it's a very lightweight app, very lightweight that you can put on there. I totally recommend that. I've been using that app ever since I started using Android phones. I've been using that app forever. So anyway, so that's one that's one thing that you can do right now that will work for you. The other is that if you are using Android 6.0 or above, depending upon again what Moto G you're using, of course, you can do the combined storage thing. And now they have SanDisk has there's an architecture for micro SD cards called U3A2. Okay, and I put a link in the show notes for this, where you can, it'll take you to Amazon, and they're not expensive at all. In fact, a 64 gig one, as long as your card reader as long as your phone can do 64 gigs, is only like $20 right now. It's really, really inexpensive. But these are the fastest cards on the micro SD cards on the market. And they are blazing fast. Now, I can't exactly say that it's not going to hit your performance in some way if you do the combined storage thing with one of these, but it's the best shot you've got. There is a faster class of micro SD card. I think it's UHS-2, but UHS-2, while that exists, it actually has a different pin structure than all previous micro SD cards. Okay, so UHS-2, there's no smartphone that is compatible with UHS-2. And honestly, and that's fast enough to where I think that the combined, the IOPS and everything would go fast enough to where, you could do the combined storage thing. But again, if you have to buy a whole new smartphone just to use UHS-2, you might as well buy a smartphone that has at least 32 gig of onboard storage, right? Then it's not even an issue. So, but yeah, if it can handle a 64 gig card, and I think that's the smallest they make. So because I know there are smartphones that can only handle a 32 gig micro SD card, right? But if it could handle a 64 gig micro SD card, get one of these. This might be your best bet. And if you're running at least Android 6.0, get a U3 A2 SanDisk card and pop that in and do the combined storage thing. And like I said, I put in a link in the show notes that gives you the instructions on how to make that happen. And that might be your best bet overall, to go forward with this. Myself, I use a smartphone. Again, I have the Nokia 6.1 right now. That has 32 gig of onboard storage. That does just fine for, having all my apps on there. I think I have maybe like 5 to 6 gig free on the onboard storage. But I put in 128 gig micro SD card, and I point all of my like Audible. I point Audible to download all books to the micro SD card. I point my podcast app. I use Pocket Casts. I point that to store everything on the SD card. Anything that I can get stored on the SD card, I still do that even when I have 32 gigs of onboard storage. Because, the main thing for me with a smartphone, I use it for Signal, even though I use Signal for desktop very often and most often. I use it for Signal. I rarely, like most people, I rarely use it for phone calls. I will use it as a GPS, right? I'll use APPENDIX for mapping. But beyond that, beyond like Signal and, using it as a GPS, I really, and you do your banking on there and whatever. I really don't do much else with this thing, I really don't use it for any kind of crypto affairs. I could, but I generally don't. I have my Trezor and everything that I like to use for all of that. So beyond those couple things I do, the main thing that my smartphone is used for is, it's my media machine, right? Like, it's where I read my comic books. It's where I listen to audiobooks. It's where I listen to music. Not that it's all getting stored on the phone. Some of that is okay. And a lot of it though is just being accessed from my NAS, from my network area storage through apps on my smartphone. But, so like that 128 gigs, like I use that to store offline maps for Awesome or for OSM and, OpenStreetMaps. That's what OSM stands for. And is for Android. I'll store offline maps on that, and that can take up like 20 gig because I'll put the whole world on there, right? And I will use I'll use all that storage for loading on tons of independent audiobooks outside of Audible itself. And I use a smart audiobook player, which I know a patron asked about that recently. That is the audiobook player that I recommend outside of Audible itself. I'll store all kinds of, and even movies and whatever, that I need to get watching. I'll make sure all of that gets stored on the micro SD card. So, it just, considering the bloat that modern apps are, having an SD card slot is still so important, and again, especially since, I go through books and not that I go through a lot of like audiobooks, because they are certainly what take up the most space on my SD card, and it's not podcasts, because I barely listen to podcasts anymore. There are very, very, I listen to Security Now, I listen to Collider Jedi Council, and I'll listen to like the Eddie Trunk Show, and that's about it. I used to listen to so many fucking podcasts, but not anymore. But anyway, there's a lot of like audiobooks or even courses from the teaching company, right? The Great Courses series that I like to keep there for reference when I want to listen to something, and I'll have bookmarks and all that. So, my smartphone is very much, my media player more than anything else. I really don't use it. I don't even use it that much for communication. I don't use it much for anything like that. It's just a GPS, and even that, like, I'm half tempted most of the time to just like get an old Garmin or TomTom, and just rock and roll with that, just so, like, because I've really tried to lessen the amount that I use this thing. Of course, honestly, I could probably get away with just an iPod, like an iPod Touch, and that would do everything I want, because like I said, I don't really use it for communication much. So anyway, getting way off track here. any of those solutions that I mentioned, either doing the combined storage with an SD card if you're using Android 6.0 and up, that's a solution, but you got to use the exact SD card that I linked to in the show notes. Okay, the SanDisk U3A2, you have to use that one. Because all the other ones are just too slow. This is the fastest thing on the market next to micro SD cards that don't even fit in smartphones right now. Do that, or you can run SD made. Again, get the Pro version, and you can just keep running that like once a week, and that should take care of you very well. Or you can root the phone, and I mentioned a couple apps. What was it? Folder Mount, I think it was. Yeah, Folder Mount and Apps to SD. Those will help you, that as well. But either of those, it's all up to threshold, which one's easiest for you or most possible for you to do. So hopefully that helps you out. Okay, let's get on to another question. Let's get on to our more philosophical question, shall we? So here we go. And I'm going to try and not get heated up about this, because I think that's where some of the confusion comes in with this kind of question. I actually get this a lot. Especially over the past couple of years. And this is someone who's, I'll admit, I'm not like playing favorites, but kind of playing favorites, because this is a person that's in kind of the higher tiers of, within Sovereign Tech Patrons. So I wanted to get to this and wanted to show that I value what they're bringing, what they're delivering to me. And, I want to address it for them. So anyway, hey, Stallion, I love you. I love you. I love you too. I don't know that this is news for you. I don't know that this is new for you, and I haven't been listening to Sovereign Tech from the beginning, but honestly, I'm surprised you get asked to speak at libertarian events. I've noticed over the past couple of years all right, hold on. Me too. I'm just as surprised as you, believe me. It's a total crapshoot. I'm totally shocked. Whenever it comes in, it's like, hey, would you like to speak? Like, me? Or some of these people follow me on Twitter or something, and I go, wait, what? No, that's no. All right. Not to toot my own horn, but actually, people love me speaking at events, and they claim that I draw a pretty good crowd. So okay, well, maybe we'll talk more about that later, whatever. So, all right, let me read on. I've noticed over the past couple of years a growing, what I can only call hostility towards libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. Okay, I want to read the whole thing, but let me stop there. No, I don't have hostility. I think that's a very strong, very, very strong word to be using for how I feel. But let me read more, and then we'll talk about it. I don't guess, or wait, let me see. Towards libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. I don't recall. Here we go. Sorry, I don't recall you ever calling yourself an anarcho-capitalist, so I don't think that's out of order. But I guess I always kind of assumed you were in that vein, but now I don't think you are at all. I do remember you being on Free Talk Live, and now I think I'm rambling, but I guess I'm just curious what's with the dramatic shift away from libertarianism, and what's with all of the insults. Again, I love you. I don't want you to change a bit, but it does seem different somehow. I know you said your new user podcast would eventually discuss the concept of rights, so could you fast forward to this on user podcast? Or fast forward to talking about anarchy in general. Just trying to square all of this away. Thank you for all the amazing content you put out there. I listen to you daily. Hope that doesn't scare you. Holy shit. Don't listen to me. No. Yeah. No, I know. I do. I pretty much do come out with daily content. It is kind of, that's what scares me. How the hell do I do this? Yeah. All right. So anyway, no, it doesn't scare me. I'm honored that anyone listens to me that much. I get plenty of emails like that too, where people are just like, look, I just want to hear your voice every day. I'm like, well, okay. I don't want to hear my voice every day, but I'm glad you do. All right. So I think I get what you're asking. All right, let me address the initial part first. So this is someone who is in the dilettante of the Triple Black Arts reward tier, which is $5 and up. So they have listened to user podcast, obviously. I am debating what you're asking. of, should I just fast forward to the rights thing? I mean, the reason that I started from the beginning, and we're going to go a few episodes where we're talking, well, I don't want to say a few episodes, but it's going to be a little bit before we even get to Earth on the show, on User Podcast. But there is a reason that I am starting from quote unquote the beginning, like the beginning of the universe or the lack thereof, and going forward, because all of it plays into eventually where we do get to the discussions around rights and anarchism. Okay. Not that you're going to necessarily hear anything new from what I have said in the past. I mean, there might be some new things or examples or something like that, but my opinions, and it kind of addresses your larger question, my ideology, my thoughts, my opinions, haven't really changed in, I'll say, the past 5 years. Okay. Now, Sovereign Tech's been around longer than that, but in the past 5 years, none of that's really changed for me. So and there's YouTube videos. Like, if you want to hear me talk about rights, you want to hear me talk about the NAP, you want to hear me talk about my thoughts on libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. I mean, there's whole YouTube videos that I've put together where I do give conversations about that. In fact, somebody was from Germany was commenting on it the other day. They might have even just become a patron, and they're like, in fact, they messaged me and they're just like, holy shit. Like, I think you're appealing to my cult senses. I want to join your cult and all this. I mean, they were dead serious. They thought it was beautiful. They thought it was amazing what I had to say. And I'm honored by that. I'm never going to start a cult, and I'm not a cult. Thank you. But I've done my damnedest to make sure that doesn't happen. But anyway, I mean, you can listen to some of that there, and it's in a somewhat succinct format, even though it doesn't have all the connective tissue that I think it does. So eventually I will get to that on User Podcast. There's a part of me that just wants to skip right to it and do the episodes about that to get the point out there, because I think where a lot of people initially wanted the User Podcast to be is to where it's something that people can listen to in 15 minutes and get the philosophy that I espouse on Sovereign Tech. And I understand why people want that. And I agree that that's a valuable thing to have out there. Okay. Not that Sovereign Tech has its own philosophy that hasn't been around for a few hundred years, if not thousands. Okay. But it's something that's not necessarily the most popular. And so to have some kind of succinct format for it, I think is an important thing. I'll get to it. I don't think I'm going to fast forward though on that. I appreciate you asking. I appreciate you being a patron in that level where you listen to that. But I really feel like this has to be, I mean, this is a funny thing. So like when Stephanie and I first started dating, okay, I remember the night that I gave her the conversation, or we had the conversation of some of my crazier ideas. Okay. I remember the dinner, or actually we were having lunch. We were at a conference. Okay. And we had just started dating, and we were talking about all this, and then it turned into an all night long thing, and not that kind of, it might have turned, anyway, excuse me. So it turned into an all night long thing, kind of talking about this. And then, we started with that. And then the conversations keep on going. And then, there's the other historical conversations that go until 5 a.m. And then next thing she's binge watching like the first, because at the time that's all there was, like the first 4 or 5 seasons of Ancient Aliens, which, not that I agree with Georgia Tsoukalos or, Eric Von Daniken or any of those cats, on Ancient Aliens, nor do I think aliens have ever been to Earth, which I've brought up many times on Sovereign Tech. But, there's a lot of kind of alternative ideas and interpretations that only a show like Ancient Aliens can put together and bring out in the mainstream. And there have been some episodes of Ancient Aliens that were fucking brilliant. In the second season, there's the episode about Nazis, which is just a dynamite 45 minutes piece of documentary film. And at the time, Ancient Aliens was trying to be a serious documentary. It didn't turn into the kind of, wacky shit that it is now. So, there's some value there. But the point being is that it was a very slow introduction to all of these ideas, that took years with Stephanie and I. And it's funny because, like, she'll be, we'll have somebody over, or, we're at a party, or, whatever we're doing, and we're talking to people, and she'll just come out of like nowhere and say, hey, have you ever watched Ancient Aliens? And it's like, no, you can't do it that way, because they're just going to think you're nuts. You can't just start talking about this shit. Like, you have to do the slow build. Otherwise, people do think you're crazy. But if you do a slow build where you start with the reasonable, and then you just kind of keep building on top of that, not at the logical fallacy of the stacked deck or anything, okay? But you just keep building on top of that. And then eventually, like, people get it, right? You get to that point where you get it. So I can't fast forward is my point in this, is that, like, I personally think this has to be discussed we got to start from the beginning and work our way until we get to that point, because you have to know the history. You have to know, and you have to understand the science, the genuine science of, the very nature of the universe, because I think that has repercussions around where, say, if you want to start talking about rights, what are rights? Where do they come from? Do they even exist? Or are they just biological universals, which are all things that I've talked about before? Okay. So, I'd love to just fast forward to that, but I don't think that I can do that. I want it to build on top of a lot of other episodes. It might take a little while before we get to that, but when we get there, there's going to be this beautiful thing, at least I hope it is, this beautiful thing known as the User Podcast, and you can share it with your friends or whatever, in the future, because I've already talked about releasing that publicly down the line, further down the line, or start releasing it publicly further down the line. You can share it with your friends, and then maybe they can get it. Maybe they'll be like, holy shit, and it could be in some ways almost an anarchist cosmos or an anarchist the day the universe changed, something, along those lines. I would not begin to suggest I am at, James Burke's or Carl Sagan's level of brilliance, or that I at their level of production, but, I'm giving it the old college try. But I probably will talk a little bit about rights here anyway. So, okay. See, this is why I do User Podcast, because where to start? My shift away from libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. So there was a time where I had no problem calling myself a libertarian. This would be around 2007 or 8, maybe a little after that. And there was also a time where I would start to not want to be called a libertarian, say, but I certainly would want to be called an anarcho-capitalist. I used to self-identify with that. And there might even be early episodes of Sovereign Tech where I may have said that. Though someone recently, a longtime listener who listened from episode 1, or at least went back, mentioned that I think I called myself an anarcho-feminist in the first episode of Sovereign Tech. But I might have also said anarcho-capitalist somewhere in there. But, that's honestly neither here nor there. So, yeah, there was a time where I identified that way. There was a time, where I would rock those terms and but that time, honestly, in the grand scheme, was very short-lived, and grand scheme is an important thing to bring up here. I have lots of friends, lots of people, lots of listeners, lots of people that identify as either libertarians or anarcho-capitalists. I totally understand why they do. I respect these people. I love these people. I think that they are wonderful. I have said over and over again that, honestly, I don't care what you call yourself, what you self-identify as long as you're willing to leave other people alone and let them try whatever system works for them. Okay. Or that they try to make work for them. They might find out that it'll fail. You might have some, just over to the left here, you might have some communists next door that are trying communism, and it ends up failing hard on them, maybe. And, but at least you did the, dare I say, moral thing. And I don't like to use that word, but you did the moral thing, and you let them try, and you let them do it next to you as long as they didn't bother you and you didn't bother them. Okay. So I don't care about terms as long as everybody's going to leave the other person alone. The minute you stop leaving, or the minute that you're not leaving other people alone, there's only one term for you. You're an authoritarian. I don't care if you have this, if it's the state or if there's a governmental body of some kind. It doesn't matter what it takes shape as. The instant you stop leaving people alone, outside of some degree of, self-defense, maybe that comes into play or whatever, you're an authoritarian. You just failed at this entire thing called liberty and freedom. Just straight up. Now, the reason, that I don't identify with libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism is that a lot of people that do identify with those terms, I consider authoritarians. And I really do, because they have they have like these moral codes. They have these rights and all these other things that, oh shit, if you infringe upon, well, I can go for my gun and blah, blah, blah. Or they think they know how society should be set up. The only thing that I ever espouse, okay, is that people have, just like what I was talking about, people need to have the options. Okay, it's not about, well, there should only be white people here, or this should only be here, or, I can have my covenant community, or I can do this, blah, blah, blah. It's about everybody having the best possible, or having the most options. I mean, yeah, you have to have the intellect, the mentality to be able to do something with those options, but regardless, you should have them. And that's it. That's all that I espouse, is setting things up to where people have the most options possible. Obviously, government gets in the way of options, because freedom is one thing. Freedom is choice. Okay? And whatever way things are to where you have the most choice, that's what freedom looks like. I would argue that a lot of the writings within anarcho-capitalism, that get espoused by, say, the Mises Institute or other places, are not centered around giving you the most choice. They are centered more around, well, we'll do things this way. Don't worry, things will work out this way. We'll have the natural elites. We'll have this, blah, blah, blah. And it turns into a huge clusterfuck. Libertarianism has largely become political, and I do not, electoral politics is about as anti-choice as you can fucking get in life. So while not everybody, who calls themselves, there's people who call themselves libertarians today, and they are absolutely anarchists. Like they believe in no government whatsoever. There are people who call themselves anarcho-capitalists, who have no problem if over on this little part of the land, there's commies, and on this part of the little land, there's, people that are into rewilding, some kind of like ecological anarchists of some kind. And there's people over here and yada, 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 and they don't care, and they're going to do their free market and they have a good time. In dynamite for you. Okay. Like I think that's wonderful. This is an example I often bring up. So, because there's a lot of times where I complain about Christians on my show, and often that complaint centers around one little piece of theology. And that piece of theology is the concept of hell. If you believe in eternal hellfire, and that people go to that, and that, like, effectively, let's break it down. If you tell your children that if they do this or that they could burn in hell forever, I've got a problem with you. Like that. Do you realize like how threatening you're being to a very young mind? But here's the thing, is that when I complain about Christians and I call them authoritarians and so on, if you're one of those Christians that doesn't believe in eternal hellfire, okay, and I say specifically eternal hellfire because there are Christians who either A, don't believe in hell at all, and think that at the end everybody goes to heaven, and they have some ancient books. Granted, they're not in the what most of Christianity considers the New Testament canon, but they have some ancient texts that would suggest that that's so, right? Apocalypse of Paul and so on. Again, you can call those apocryphal texts, but if they, look. The books you've got were decided by the fucking Council of Nicaea, who was run by people that most Christians today wouldn't even want to quote, from that. So give me a fucking break. I mean, I'm not saying every book's valid, but they might as well be, considering the way that the New Testament canon came together. It's in no way the same way that Torah came together. Not really. Anyway, I'm getting off track. But if you're a Christian that doesn't believe in the concept of eternal hell, that's what I was going to say. Because there's also Christians. So there's Christians who think that everybody just goes to heaven eventually. Or there's Christians who think that hell is just like you just get snuffed out of existence. Not that you're burning forever, but that you're just kind of snuffed out of existence. Now, I don't necessarily dig that either. But that's a whole lot different than saying, you're going to burn forever. You're telling someone else you're going to burn forever and all this bullshit. So, and granted, even within that, there's people that I can get along with better. I have lots of friends who are Catholics, and I think Catholicism is if there's a true Christianity, that's probably it. Or at least they have the best claim. I'll say that much. All right. So, next to whatever, like Eastern Orthodox or something. So my point being is that, look, when I say something negative about Christians, but you're a Christian that doesn't believe in the concept of eternal hellfire or eternal hell, well, then obviously I'm not talking about you. Just like if you're a libertarian, okay, that gives a shit about social issues, or, you're an anarcho-capitalist that doesn't mind if there is another type of economy being practiced over to the other side of you, then I'm not talking about you. I'm not being harsh towards you. I am being harsh towards the dogmatic. Okay, because dogma is also very much the opposite of choice. I am arguing against the dogmatic. I have a problem with authoritarians. But I want people to realize that a lot of these celebritarians and other people, that you hold up, not that I'm going to speak out against them anymore. I'm tired of that taking my time. But I want you to realize that if you're within, you consider yourself an anarchist, you're within the philosophy of anarchism, that a lot of your, bigger names are as authoritarian in the abstract as just about any politician. And yes, they are. So that's why I don't like to run with terms like anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism and so on. Even though, honestly, libertarianism, around the rest of the world and historically was a reference to, socialists and communists. Like it didn't mean what, like the Libertarian Party of the United States anymore. And yeah, I know there's a capital L libertarian, and then there's a, lowercase l libertarian. So yeah, I am completely all about freedom. And if you are an anarcho-capitalist, I am all about your freedom to practice the way you want to practice. But for fuck's sake, you better let other people live their lives the way they want to. Okay? We don't want to be hurting each other at all. And I don't buy these arguments. These arguments are so fallacious that, by nature, communists have to, are communist, like this is what a lot of anarcho-capitalists would say, is that any communist is tacitly an enemy of freedom. That's just not true. Okay. But they would argue back the other way. They would say, well, any capitalist is tacitly against freedom because, capitalism, in their opinion, automatically means that like all resources have to be owned and collected and exploited. And that's key word, exploited. They'd argue back and forth on this. I don't think either side's true on that. I think capitalism doesn't have to have like this endless growth aspect to it. I don't think communism has to be where everything is literally not owned by anybody or something like that. It's a big universe. And that gets at the big key here. This is kind of the major point that I want to bring to you. And, whenever you start hyphenating anarchism, anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-syndicalist, and whatever else, or whenever you start tossing in terms like even isms in general, I will call myself an anarchist. It's the simplest term that I can run with and the broadest. So that's what I go with. Anytime you start tossing out anything really beyond that, in my opinion, you run into what I think is very small thinking. On Sovereign Tech, I talk about this a lot, and this will come up in the user podcast eventually. I talk about the galactic mindset, where you are literally thinking on a galactic scale, okay? And you approach any problem, any issue, any case. For starters, you can get down to the minutia. You can get down to micromanaging if you want. But for starters, picture it on a galactic scale. What does this mean? For the solar system. If you can't go that big as the galaxy, what does this mean for the solar system in general? How does this apply? Like when you're talking about resources and everything, what does this mean for the solar system? And you'll find you suddenly have a very different opinion on things when you start to consider the galactic scale of the equation. Okay, when you think bigger. Like when you're concerned about resources or this, like, oh, no, we're not going to have enough land, or this is my land, blah, blah, blah. Where else am I going to go? Or, oh, shit, the commies are going to be, there's too many of them, or I don't know, whatever the fuck you're thinking. I want you, don't 30-foot view it, 30 million mile it, okay? Go to the fucking Kuiper Belt at least. And then look and say, oh, actually, there's plenty of room. Actually, no, we could practice over here, and they could practice over here, or I could do this over here, I could do that over here. Oh, there's plenty of helium-3. What the fuck am I talking about? Take it to that level, because we are getting there. And even if we're not there, think about the problems at that level, and that's where you find genuine solutions. Stop thinking so small that, well, damn it, there's only so many red wagons. Now there doesn't have to be. You could build them on Titan. You could. And then think about, well, okay, I mean, because honestly, the bigger scale that you go, small is beautiful. All right. And to have like anything deep and meaningful, you have to go small. But like as far as these huge problems that all these people are writing these fucking books about how to solve, oh, this is how we'll solve security issues. This is how we'll solve this. This is how we'll solve that. It's all like at way too small a level, but it's something, it's written with a small mind that's supposed to apply to fucking everybody on the planet. That's ridiculous. Here I am getting heated up. Think about things on a galactic scale. Think about how to solve things on a galactic scale. And if you say, well, that's just going to take too long. Well, what? You thought that the shit was easy? You thought licking the human condition, solving major human problems like childhood trauma and all this other stuff was what? You thought you could flick a switch for that? You thought you could just tell people this is how it is and that's how it's going to be? Well, there it is. There's that authoritarianism. No. These things take time. They take a long time. They take a lot of inventiveness. They take a lot of creativity. The real solutions take time, and they might take a long fucking time. All right. But they're worthwhile striving for. And even in striving, it can inspire people to do better and to be more peaceful. Just in striving. To get to the stars or to find the solutions in the stars, because I honestly think that's where all the answers are. So think on a galactic scale, and most of the writing that I find within just about any school of anarchism, not all, but just about any school of anarchism or within libertarianism is thinking way too fucking small. Way too small. And the solutions for humanity in general are not small. They get solved on the grand scale. Now, for the individual, and I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the paradigm. And this is where things get confusing. And this is why, I need to do like an entire podcast series on the matter. The individual is the measure of all things, right? Your way really is, in many ways, it really is your way or the highway. But the only way that you can even get your way is if you have the options, right? Like I was just saying. So coming up with like moral codes, coming up with like, oh, well, all morality is based off of property and blah, blah, like I'm not saying necessarily that some of that stuff are bad ideas, but I am saying that a lot of that can be just as tyrannical, as just ordering things by the gun, which is what the government does. If you try to like lay out this universal moral code or something. Now, I mean, you can set up your own little rules with your own little community, but understand that we are all individuals and not everybody has to agree to your shit. And I think you can only even get to that understanding if you, unless you have to have that galactic mindset first to really grasp that you are in a very, very big picture and you might be thinking far too small as far as that goes. Nothing wrong with thinking, on a smaller level. Of course, there's a difference between thinking on a smaller level and thinking small. There's nothing wrong with thinking on a smaller level. Okay. But you got to grasp the big picture part of it first. You have to start at the beginning. I bring up this example all the time. Steve Jobs. Okay, let's bring him back to tech. Steve Jobs. He and his wife, they'd be putting new furniture in the house, and the way that they would start on choosing new furniture is they would say, "Okay, let's put a sofa here." Steve Jobs would stop and say, "Okay, let's start at the beginning. Why do we need a sofa?" Or like, what's the purpose of a sofa? And they would, that's how they would kind of do everything. And that's as simple as fucking furniture, right? And I'm not even necessarily arguing for that, but that's the point is, okay, whoa. Let's start at the beginning. Okay. Especially when it comes to matters of what does human freedom look like? And what are we going to do about this? And blah, blah, blah. Start at the beginning, ask yourself those questions. Okay. But you got to start at the big scale. I mean, like that's starting at the biggest scale. Like, wait, why do we need a sofa? Like, I mean, you're starting at the very, very beginning, which is again, the biggest scale. So yeah, that's my thing is that I don't think any of these ideologies think on a grand enough scale. And historically, a lot of them maybe couldn't, because they didn't think about the idea, that humanity could go to the stars, and so on. I don't think that argument exactly holds water, if someone wants to make that claim, because I think we've been planning on, you can read from 200, 300, hell, 400 years ago Well, at least 300 anyway. You could read from like 300 years ago where, we're talking about that, there might be whole civilizations on the moon. Or on Mars, and that eventually they might come here and we might have to go to war or something like that. But people genuinely believe that we would be encountering people from other planets, and that we might end up going to those other planets. So, the concept of going to the stars is far from new. It's far from a 20th century thing. So I think we could think on that grander scale for far longer than we're willing to admit. But we do need to think on that scale. I've talked about this before. In fact, once again, I know he was a political shill, but Neil deGrasse Tyson in his book Astrophysics for People in a Hurry, very short book. But he talks about it. He talks about what he calls the cosmic scale, which that's a term. I've been talking about the galactic scale for years on this show, well before that book ever came out. I've never heard him talk about the cosmic. I'm not saying he copied my idea or anything, or that I wasn't copying someone else. Because I could have been. But whatever, he's talking about the cosmic scale, but kind of same thing. Like, he talks about how when you think about things on a cosmic scale, suddenly flags don't matter. Bingo! Yes! Exactly! He proved the point that even a political shill like him, when he starts thinking on that scale, you get to the heart of the matter. And that is that all these things are social constructs and bullshit. Governments are nonsense, and maybe a lot of the violent reactions or maybe all of them are nonsense. And, it's like in the last chapter of the book, it's a beautiful little read because he brings home the point that once we think about things on the largest scale possible, suddenly you get to the heart of the matter and you realize how much bullshit so much of what we deal with on Earth is, and that's the thing. And I don't see anybody in anarcho-capitalism or libertarianism taking on that cosmic, or as I call it, galactic scale. I just don't. So I because they're not starting where I start from, I just don't, I don't connect on that because their solutions, in my opinion, are too small. And I don't think what I'm saying is impractical because it is the very nature of the universe. Okay, thinking about things, on a galactic scale, the galaxy's there, so why wouldn't you think about it? It's not like it's something that doesn't exist unless, if you're a flat earther, okay, I guess that's a different story. Maybe that's why flat earth theory is so popular with certain segments, not all, certain segments of anarcho-capitalism and libertarianism. Maybe that's why. I never really thought about that because then suddenly all of their moral codes and everything else that they want to lay out and everything's got to be based on property and scarcity and blah, blah, blah. I don't believe in post-scarcity, by the way, but you have to rock all that. Well, yeah, when there's just the earth and, there's actually no space to go to and there's no real sky. Well, I suppose now that makes sense. Maybe that's why it's so appealing. I could get that. Again, I don't think most libertarians, I don't even think most anarcho-capitalists believe in the flat earth theory, but there are plenty of them out there. So, all right, I spent way too long on that subject, but I hope that makes sense. It's just not in line with my way of thinking, and that's really it. I'm not hostile towards libertarians. I'm not hostile towards anybody, like not like physically hostile in any way. And I have a personal rule of, I never believe in using lethal force. So I'm not going to hurt anybody. Holy shit. I don't know that you were saying that, but hostility is a very, very strong word. No, I mean, like I said, me, I guess, if one had to put me in a Venn diagram of sorts, I'd probably fit in fairly well. In fact, I know I have a longtime listener who he did like a Venn diagram of anarchism, and he put a bunch of different what he considered thought leaders. I don't consider myself a thought leader, but he put me under anarcho-capitalism. And I said to him, like, wait, I'm not there. Like, well, what are you doing putting me there? He says, oh, no. He says, I know you don't consider yourself one, but you do capitalism better than most capitalists. And I was like, okay. So I get it that I fit within the Venn diagram. And hey, whatever, because some of the most beautiful people in my life identify with those terms. But that's not me, like I don't identify with those terms. And I think that my way of thinking is on a very different scale than what most people like that think. So there you go. It's not meant to insult anybody. And I have absolutely no hostility towards these people. Again, I speak at their events and I generally don't make fun of anybody there. I know and just to drive the point home one more time, look, if you're not one of those libertarians that's doing what I'm talking about, or if you're not one of those ANCAPs that's doing what I'm talking about, then I'm not talking about you. But I hope you realize that there are people within your ideologies that are doing bullshit, that are authoritarians, and that are, saying the craziest, nonsense in the world. I hope you're willing to admit that and not just say, well, it's for the greater good, because then you lost everything at that point. As soon as you start arguing for the greater good, So, because again, everything gets measured by the individual. So there's no greater good than what's for the individual. And I know you're saying, well, Deb, what about the galactic scale? Well, that's all about making sure that the individual's taken care of on the galactic scale. So, all right, enough of that. Speaking of individuals, Nita Strauss. Holy hell. I am such a fan. Nita Strauss, so we're getting into our album of the week now, okay? Nita Strauss is she is actually the lead guitarist for Alice Cooper and has been for a good while now. When I last saw Alice Cooper, it was on the Motley Crue, like their farewell tour, okay? And Alice Cooper was opening for Motley Crue on their farewell tour. Saw her perform there. She is just a dynamite on the stage, and she is a dynamo with the guitar. And a beautiful woman as well. But obviously brilliant. She's had a really, really wild, I think maybe it has to do with #MeToo or what, but she's been like performing at major wrestling events now, along with one of my favorite ladies out there, Lizzie Hale of Hailstorm. And Nita Strauss is just amazing. So she finally, just last week, came out with her own solo album. Now, this is in the key and vein of Yngwie Malmsteen, who I'm a huge fan of, where this is really virtuistic, or not virtue as in virtues, but virtuo, I don't know what you would call that, virtuoso, style guitar playing. I mean, like, this is, classical, like, if you know Yngwie, you know what we're talking about here, or more like your Joe Satriani, who I'm such a huge fan of. This is what Nita's delivering with this. So there's no vocals. It's all just her playing, and she does an amazing, at the last track on it is, she does a version of Queen's Show Must Go On. Badass, with no lyrics even, like, just amazing. This is music that, it's exciting, like I'm actually in awe at just how great. The album's called Controlled Chaos. You got to pick it up. Buy it if you can, because I think she's worth supporting. She is so amazing. And yeah, Nita Strauss, Controlled Chaos. It's track for track. Every track is just fantastic. I feel like I'm listening to, to like classic Steve Vai, with a little harder edge. And that's no disrespect to Steve Vai, because Steve Vai is, the fucking man. This is really, if you're into like real, heavy guitar, but with kind of a classical overtone to it, and, no lyrics, okay, no vocals whatsoever. This is an album that's just going to set you on fire. And if you've never been into that kind of music, let this be your introduction into that world, because it is a wonderful, wonderful world of music. With your Steve Vais, your Joe Satrianis, and your Yngwie Malmsteens, and so on, even though they would sometimes work with vocalists. So anyway, check that out. Nita Strauss, Controlled Chaos. What a great album title too, especially considering thinking about things on the galactic scale. That works. She's brilliant. So an awesome album. All right, I am going to wrap this up. I don't want to call this your Thanksgiving edition of the Wednesday Patreon Q&A, but there it is. And before you start saying, oh shit, the stallion is, he doesn't believe in morality. He just wants everybody. He wants chaos. He wants everybody. No. Stop. I'm just ahead of the curve. Some people might know what that is anyway. No. Calm down. All right. Anyway, I guess you'll just, if you have questions around what I said, ask me the questions. Please argue with me about it. I would love to, and in a kind way, and I would be kind. I think I was very kind in that response. Talk to me about it. Most people just drop their patronage, and it's like, wait, what? Like, if you're really worried about me, if you've loved the message that I've put out there, I'd hope you try to convince me if you think I'm espousing something that's going to, bring an end to civilization. Let's not go there. But that's going to somehow harm another human being or something. Like, talk to me. Tell me about it. Like, I would love to have that conversation, or come on a live hangout or something. Set it up ahead of time. Like, hey, I want to have a big conversation on your live Q&A hangout. We will set that up and we will make that happen. Don't just walk away. All right. Let's talk about it. So anyway, all right, that's it. I will see all of you on the other side.